Hey, thank you both for sitting down with me. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Lori, how about we begin with you?
Sure. My name is Lori Robinson, and I am the Senior Director of Strategy at SailPoint. And I've been at SailPoint about just over 6 months, so not very long. Before joining SailPoint, I was at Gartner as an analyst for the past 15 or so years covering identity and access management.
Excellent. So we can still haze you because you're within the 1 year window. Right?
Right. Yes.
Ryan, how about yourself?
Yeah, Ryan Cluff. I'm actually a director of our identity governance and administration consulting practice at Integral Partners, where I've been for 6 years. Actually, it'll be 6 years on Monday that I've been with Integral Partners. I've been in this space for just under 20 years. I live in the Nashville, Tennessee area. And our company headquarters in Boulder, Colorado, but we're a consulting company that's focused solely on identity and access management.
That's great. Okay, we can't haze you because you've been around too long.
I'm the only target.
Yeah. Hey, Lori, can you talk a little bit about the dynamics that are impacting the way businesses are approaching security today?
Sure. I mean, it's a really interesting time to be in the security and identity industry. I certainly think, I mean, we beat this horse to death, I know, but the pandemic has certainly changed the dynamic with work from home, and the threat landscape has changed. So I think already with digital transformation, and as more and more organizations were automating processes, we had all sorts of new challenges in the security realm. As you know, we have the cloud, whether it's hybrid, multi-cloud, and now we're moving into this distributed cloud world where we have all sorts of cloud instances going on across multiple different cloud providers. That was already a challenge. Then you start to bring in software automation, and we have all these APIs and machines and things that are accessing our environments, and the threat landscape has just continued to expand and expand and expand. So I think it's a really interesting time to be a security and identity professional, because at the same time, while all of the environment is becoming more and more complex, we also have new and increased regulation, and the threat landscape is getting more and more complicated because the threat actors are sneaky, if you will. They're changing with our environment. And so it just is really complex because you have new environments you're trying to protect, more regulations and requirements from a security perspective, and then, you know, more sophisticated attackers. So there's a lot happening, and it's become a really interesting field.
I thought it was funny when we talked the other day, you likened it to teen parties out there. Yeah. It's just so on the money for what we're seeing, the exact same thing out there.
Right. So, I was just going to say, I think what's happening is we tend to focus so much on enablement, right? And this was the teen party analogy, is that, you know, you have teenagers come over and you check and make sure that they're who they say they are, and that they're going to, you know, that they are your kids' friends, and they come in, and then the next thing you know, you like let them run wild through your house, and I don't know, you run to the grocery store or whatever. And I think, as we were talking, it's sort of the analogy with security and identity specifically. Like, we focus so much on enablement and getting people access to the things they need in our environments, and checking that they are who they say they are, kind of the zero trust model and multi-factor authentication. But then we let them have free reign when they come inside. And I think some of the challenges we have in this new environment is that you have to not only ensure people are who they say they are, but you need to know, do they have the proper access controls in place? Are we adhering to SOD? Are we making sure we have governance and oversight once they're inside, and we know who has access to what and what that actually means? I mean, I keep pointing out that all roads point to group membership, and we have this broad sweeping group membership that's getting access to so many things. And I think that we've got to be careful about that.
So you bring up a good point in governance. Privilege and governance strike me as opposite ends of the identity balance. Do you think we're overextending privilege at the expense of governance?
That is the fear. I mean, there's always been this struggle between security and enablement. And I think that's sort of the question you're asking, really, is that we do have to ensure that our users are able to perform the tasks they need, whether that's employees working from home. We need to get them access. There's business operations that have to keep running. And so we do tend to focus first on enablement. And this happened even in the world 15 years ago when we started doing identity and access management on premise. It was all about SSO and getting people access. And then we came back and we pulled back and we said, do we have the controls in place? Are we governing that access? Are we adhering to finer grained access control policies? So it's always that battle of ensuring that users can do what they need to do to run business operations, and not just employees, even customers and partners. We need to make sure people have the access they need. But at the same time, we also need to make sure we have the controls in place and the oversight in place to lock down that access.
Ryan, let's bring you in here. Maybe you could talk a bit about the types of identity projects you're seeing. Are they primarily things like legacy migrations, or what are you saying?
That's a great question. We're actually seeing a little bit of everything still is pretty active. We have engagements where we are actually doing some of the very things that Lori was just talking about, where we're helping both the internal and the external identities, in the customer identity space as well as the internal identities, and especially with governance, putting a focus on that. We have some active clients that are definitely legacy replacements. These are people who have been doing identity pretty well for 5 years, but they need to make a big change off of a legacy system onto something new that's going to be able to take them into the future with what's being made available now with these new tools. We also have some that are just taking their first steps, into the identity space. And we have others that have just cobbled together scripts and manual processes and stuff, and they are ready to take that next step into meeting compliance, or there's some risk that they're really trying to address. But we're seeing a little bit of all of that right now.
I think I've said this before. Identity is one of those areas that just strike me that we're doing it every year, right? It's just it's a constant process. Every year in our research, we'll ask about, what are your top security projects for the next year? And identity always comes up near the top. And I'm thinking, didn't we do this last year? but to your point, I think a lot of people are all over the spectrum where they are in their identity, in their kind of journey to an identity management environment. And it's not like everyone's uniform.
That's exactly right. Everyone is at a different spot. That's what we're finding. And being able to help companies, figure out where they're at and what those next steps are. Some of them know. Some of them have started to run into some of these very things that Lori just talked about, and they're being very aggressive, trying to get in front, trying to mitigate those risks, trying to save money by adding some automation and efficiency, and to achieve those goals. So.
Can I comment?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Sorry. I think Ryan's point is really important. People are on a spectrum, but I also think one kind of tying what I was saying to what he's saying is the threat landscape is changing so quickly, and our IT environments are becoming so much more dynamic that having legacy systems that are based on static policy or where it's very difficult to roll up new systems, just don't scale in this highly complex environment. So I think it's super important to balance, sometimes you're going to keep some of your old identity infrastructure in play, but then you have to start looking at newer approaches to handle maybe some of your new use cases. So I just wanted to point that out. The two worlds are kind of colliding.
Yeah, and to your point, there's a lot of things that are kind of feeding into that, right? So this past year with the pandemic, we've seen businesses furloughing large numbers of employees and then having to bring them back on. And if they didn't, the ones I've spoken with, they didn't have a good process in place and a good identity management system. That was a big, heavy lift for them to go through as they were onboarding and offboarding people just in large numbers, something they never really thought or designed to be able to do, right? It was a big issue for them.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we saw that this year has been very interesting in that regard. We've seen, maybe a little bit of a slowdown for someone who didn't have any kind of a vision in waiting to see what was going to happen. But those who had some kind of a vision of where they were going, even when this hit, or I should say, especially when some of these things came up, the intensity and the desire to move forward just increased. Some of them doubled down. Some of our projects got bigger, got more with more scope because of the urgencies around these scenarios. And so it clearly was driving a lot of companies to say, we still have to invest in this, even in this craziness. We really need to get in front of this. So yeah, it's a very interesting year.
I think that too, certainly there's that initial response of, okay, we've got to get people access and ensure we do it in a secure way. But identity tends to lag behind other technology advancements. Yeah. I think one of the interesting things that's happening too is for organizations who were slower to go to the cloud, that's being accelerated. Anything around automation is essentially being accelerated. So I think we'll have a trickle-down effect with identity for years to come, in that securing those systems and putting access controls around some of these newer IT innovations that have come out of the pandemic, we'll continue to see. So it's been good for identity in that way.
Yeah. Well, how much of this do you think is tied to this acceleration of digital transformation we've seen? So we saw that in all the research that we've done in the past 6 months. Across the board, we're hearing about accelerations of digital transformation projects. And I know in many cases, security was struggling a little bit to keep up with this. But do you think a lot of these projects are really being driven by that acceleration, or is there something else happening?
I think that is actually a driver. I think that is a key driver. In fact, I think, even in this last Gartner IT Expo, they outlined what are the big 7 things coming or trends you need to watch out for. And one of those that made the list was identity, and especially identity in the context of managing this digital transformation and having all your stuff everywhere. That identity is becoming that new perimeter. So yeah, I do believe that there's a strong connection there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lori. I didn't want to cut you off.
I absolutely agree. I think that if you look at automation, I don't know, Ryan, which Gartner report you saw, but last year at least, their top trends included things like automation and cloud and AI and ML and human augmentation. So the way that we're interacting with machines and automation happening everywhere, and you start to bring in intelligence and just the data that you need from an intelligence perspective and the data that our AI systems are generating all have to be protected. So I think it just enhances the need for identity and security.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, what's the process you see organizations needing to go through even before they begin an identity project, right? You're looking at these things coming down the road and you go, okay, here's this project coming up. What do I need to do before I start that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's somewhat similar to other IT projects, at least some of the key components are. But you definitely need to understand your key stakeholders, the sponsorship piece of it. You need to really have a vision around where you're going. You need to really understand your use cases and what's driving you for that. Are you being driven there because of a need for efficiencies, automation, or is it really a compliance driver that's really driving you to make that step forward? You need to understand things like your own company's willingness to adopt and adapt to changing processes, or are you going to be able to use some tools that are going to help you with their process, with their out of the box processes, or are you going to be pretty strong in your own custom processes, right? Those are things that you need to think about before you decide to take that next step. Skills, what kind of skills do I have available? How much help do I really need? All those things are really important pieces to consider as you're going into this space.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add anything to that, Lori?
Sure. I think that I totally agree with everything Ryan said. Maybe just up level it a little bit. I think one thing, we talk a lot about zero trust in security circles, and kind of the core concept of that is that you can't trust anyone, right? And that your network perimeter is dead, essentially. And identity is such an important part of that. So what I mean by up-leveling is I would just say, I think it's really important in the beginning stages to understand where identity sits in your overall security program and how things tie together. I think we used to be able to get away with living in silos, identity here, security here, maybe consumer IAM somewhere else. And I think we have to start really looking at how all those pieces fit together. So as you go into your identity project, understand what are the moving parts I have here and how do they complement and enhance, whether it's a zero trust strategy or just part of a good old security strategy. Where does it fit in and what role is it going to fill?
Mm-hmm. Ryan, we talked about digital transformation, right, and its effect, but I'm still struck by how many businesses we see driving forward with new identity projects in the face of everything else that's happened this year, economic conditions and everything like that. Are there other factors that are fitting into this that we haven't talked about?
I think I'm sure there are. But I think the ones that we covered are really at the core of it. Those are the items that are really driving people to make the changes and take the step forward in this space.
Lori?
Yeah, I agree with Ryan. I think it is the things we hit on. I just think that people have always been, considering it, and maybe it just hadn't bubbled up to the top. But because of the volatility of our IT environments and the threat landscape, I think people have just realized they have to prioritize it.
All right, we got just a couple of minutes left. I'd love to hear from, and Ryan, maybe I can hear from you first about how you see identity evolving over the next couple of years. We've seen obviously pretty significant changes in the way businesses approach identity, over the past 5 years. If I asked you to look forward, a couple of years, what do you think?
I think there's going to be some continued growth in the AI and automation space. Actually, we're starting to see a couple of the customers, especially those who have been doing it for a little while, in the identity space. They really want to take advantage of machine learning and identity to help reduce a lot of the overhead that sometimes goes along with governance in general, to help with some of the fatigue that goes along with asking all of your people to certify on a high frequency. What can we do to at least alleviate some of that and improve roles overall, those sort of things. So I really see, identity continue to move in that space, leverage the innovations that are coming along with machine learning and identity AI. And I think that's going to be a trend that's going to stick for a while.
Lori, how about you? What do you see evolving over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I would really agree with Ryan. I've been talking about my top 5, and so I'll run through them real quick. I think frictionless user experience, and that involves AI, honestly, is getting to a place where users are, identity is almost seamless to them. They don't really have to interact that much with the identity system. I think kind of digital identities and the convergence of consumer and machine and workforce identities. And then AI and ML, certainly like smarter systems all the way around. And then cloud. I think as much as we talk about cloud, the complexity of the cloud and multi-cloud environments, I think one of the most acute pain points for people right now is trying to understand who has access to what across a multi-cloud environment. And then hyper automation, kind of the bundling of all of that together into this automated system, like Ryan talked about, like more and more automation, smarter workflows, smarter certifications, roles, controls.
Great. Lori and Ryan, thanks again for joining us at the CSO 50 conference. And for our viewers, make sure to stop by the SailPoint and Integral Partners booth to learn more about how they can help you address your identity challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you.